Let's take it straight then to our discussion to better understand those diplomatic offensives that India has launched and just what our strategic stand as a nation should be right now. I've got three special guests joining me for that debate. Brahma Chellaney is a strategic affairs expert, Uday Bhaskar of the Society for Policy Studies, and of course our very own consulting editor Swami Taneia is here with us as well. Gentlemen, all three of you, thank you so much for sparing time. And Swami, first I'm going to begin by asking you what you thought of Sushma Swaraj's speech today. Was it fiery enough? Was it a befitting reply to Pakistan? Would you say that India has managed to up the pressure on our neighbor?
No, of the two events, what happened in the United Nations and Modi's discussion on the Indus Waters Treaty, the second is infinitely more important. From the point of view of viewers sitting in India, Sushma Swaraj's speech may appear to be something called a fiery attack. From the point of view of people sitting in America, speeches at the UN General Assembly at this time are not news at all. This is a hardy annual. Every country goes and presents its own thing. It may be in slightly more fiery or slightly less fiery things. But frankly, this is not news in America at all. Nobody is looking at it. The idea that you are influencing the world would be a fiction. What you're doing is really, you're addressing your own audiences. Nawaz Sharif is addressing his own domestic audience. Sushma Swaraj is addressing her own. But does it make any difference to the US perception or the world perception? No. Is there the slightest chance that the world is somehow going to get together and isolate Pakistan because of what happened? Absolutely zero chance. From the point of view of the United States and others, I would say there's no question that Pakistan is a dubious and double-dealing ally, but nevertheless an ally of critical importance, especially in the logistics and passage of arms and other materials to Afghanistan. So there is no way you're going to isolate Afghanistan because of what happened. From the world's point of view, India and Pakistan have been fighting each other for 50, 60 years and are going to continue doing so. It's much of a muchness. There is really not that much change. The United States and Europe are far more concerned about terrorist or jihadi attacks in the USA or in Europe than this ancient saga going on in particular Kashmir.
So Swami,
however, yes.
So Swami, who's sitting in New York, might think that it's a non-event, but Swami, the fact is that this is the news that's really grabbing headlines, and I want to get a take from both our other panelists as well. Mr. Das, let me ask you: Were you convinced with what we heard Ms. Swaraj say? Do you see a remarkable shift in India's stance against Pakistan? Therefore.
My own take, Taneia, as far as the speech of the Foreign Minister, Ms. Sushma Swaraj, is concerned, is that it is an important procedural activity, a diplomatic activity that India has to undertake. And particularly, I would say the context is post-Uri. And the fact that the Pakistani Prime Minister, Mr. Nawaz Sharif, had made the kind of speech and the aspersions that were cast on India. My own assessment is that Ms. Sushma Swaraj made the right kind of speech. It was a combination of, I would say, rebutting some of the charges made by the Pakistani Prime Minister. It was also done in a restrained and dignified manner, and there was a fairly detailed, I would say, rebuttal of each of the issues. And I think it was important for India to remind the global audience about the trajectory as far as terrorism is concerned. Now, I agree with what Swami had said just now, that it may not make any difference. It is true that New York as a city and the UNGA in particular have 180 countries that they have to listen to, but yet every country considers this particular event to be important enough to be represented at fairly, I would say, high political level, including the appearance by the US President. Now, the second part, will it make a difference as far as isolating India, which is what Ms. Sushma Swaraj's advocacy and plea was? There I fully agree with Swami. I don't think it will make any difference, because the major players, particularly in the United Nations Security Council, both the United States and China, have an assessment and appreciation of Pakistan which is very different from India, even if they are aware of Pakistan's role in abetting terrorism. And even Russia, India's trusted friend for many decades,
right,
is now engaged in a military exercise with Pakistan. So I think that gives you an idea about the global political orientation But I still maintain that it was important for India to make the kind of, shall we say, rebuttal that Ms. Sushma Swaraj had done today at New York, and very deftly at that, if I may say so.
Mr. Chellaney, what's your own take on this? Would you sort of tend to agree with Swami and Mr. Bhaskar here that, tough talk apart, a lot more needs to be done? And I suppose we know that, but the question then is, what are the options before us?
Well, as far as Sushma Swaraj's speech was concerned, it was largely playing to the domestic audience, as Swami said. But the more important issue is that 8 days after the Uri attack, what has India done to help isolate Pakistan? India has a range of diplomatic, economic, political, and even the water option. But till date, India has ratcheted up the rhetoric, but not taken any concrete action against Pakistan. The first real step occurred today when India announced, unofficially at least, that the Indus Commission.
All right, we seem to have lost that connection. But Swami, let's talk about the bit about the Indus Waters Treaty, which I know clearly you're more interested in talking about. What about using water as a weapon? You've heard the PM today say that blood and water cannot flow together as India considers a possible change to that Indus water sharing treaty. But do you believe that realistically we can afford to scrap the treaty and curtail supplies to Pakistan? Do you not suspect that that could backfire?
You can certainly threaten various things without withdrawing from the treaty. That much is possible. The idea that we will just not allow water to go into Pakistan, that is a fantasy. Even under the treaty, we are not able to fully utilize the waters that belong to us. We have not managed to make the water structures. I mean, you can't just stop the flow of a river and divert it. Where will you divert it to? You have to have canal systems, you have to have other systems that can receive it. Now, in the case of the Chenab and the Jhelum, the northern rivers which belong to Pakistan, even if you wanted to divert them, where would you divert them to? There is no obvious place for that water to go to. What you can do is as follows. You are under the treaty only allowed to utilize that particular water for hydro generation. You are not allowed to store the water. Now, there has been a dispute very often on many dams, like Ganga recently, on whether or not what India is doing would result in a certain impoundment of water, some amount of storage, which is not allowed. And the last thing on the Ganga went against us. What India can do is saying we are going to build somewhat higher dams to generate more electricity. And you can say, no, we are not really going to stop the flow of the Indus. If you do that, then you are not really violating the treaty. And yet Pakistan will get extremely concerned and worried that if India increases the amount of storage, then India might gain the capacity of when it suits India, India can cut off water for a short time. And when it suits India, India can also use that excess water to flood Pakistan, again for a short time. In other words, you get some kind of ability to threaten things without getting out of the treaty. I do not think it can go beyond that. Not only that, I mean, if we do these threats here, what about China and India? I mean, China has laying claim to the whole of Arunachal Pradesh. Can they say until India gets out of Arunachal Pradesh, we are going to stop all the water in the Brahmaputra? Would we like that kind of situation? So I said, abandoning the Indus Waters Treaty, I would say, is out of the question. It is neither practical nor sensible. But within what the treaty says, we can play various games with Pakistan, which would certainly make Pakistan extremely uncomfortable.
Mr. Bhaskar, what would you say? Please do come in on that. Would you say that that's the way to go? Because there's another section that believes and is in favor of absolutely abrogating the treaty because, time for empty threats perhaps is over and it's time for some decisive action. Is that something that you think India should consider seriously?
No, I am in this happy position of being in total agreement with what Swami has just said.
Okay.
Which is that if you look at this in a very pragmatic way, the option of preventing water going to Pakistan does not exist, short of saying that you will allow parts of India to be flooded. But more than that, I would say there is a deeper issue here, which is that India can review the treaty. I think even a political signal from India to say that it will now carry out a fairly detailed review and utilize that quantum of water which it is currently not using. Again, as Swami pointed out, there are various options that India has, which is it can create structures for generating hydropower. That itself, I think, would be of deep concern to Pakistan, because the way in which Pakistan looks at the entire Indus water is that the criticality of the water and the irrigation to Pakistan is something that the entire population is aware of. So in many ways, India would be raising the ante. But at this stage, I think in terms of the entire holistic appreciation, there is a constituency in India which believes that we should abrogate the treaty. Personally, I think it would be imprudent, because we have to see what is the objective. And I think it would not really realize the objective that is in mind. But by all means, I think India is within its rights to review the current utilization. And this is something that has been doing the rounds for many years. Previous governments had also spoken about this, but it was never raised up to the level of the Prime Minister. So I think the very fact that Prime Minister Modi has now convened a meeting on reviewing the Indus Water Treaty is in itself, I think, a very, very strong signal about how India is looking at the entire bilateral relationship.
Okay. Mr. Bhaskar, I will keep it with you. And the water wars apart, do you also believe that a very strong case is now being made for a limited retaliation? And if yes, do explain to our viewers what you think the economic costs for both companies here could possibly be.
Well, first of all, I would say, Taneia, that if you heard Prime Minister Modi at Kozhikode, carefully and really sort of past what he was saying and the subtext of what he was saying, he, I think, was again trying to draw attention to the real challenges that India and Pakistan have. It appeared to me that now the focus will be on the diplomatic option, which is why, if you recall what Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj had also said in the UNGA, she spoke about isolating Pakistan. As I said, that is easier said than done. The very fact that Russia is currently doing a military exercise is illustrative of the challenge there. But in the event that India does take the decision to exercise the military option, they do exist. But the only point is that there would be a cost attached with it, and that is what I think India would have to really ponder over fairly carefully. And if the Prime Minister and the political sort of determination is that we will stay the course, yes, there would be a certain degree of retaliation, but then India will have to ensure that it acquires the necessary domination with a specific objective. Hypothetically, you can look at POK, Pakistan Occupied Kashmir, knowing fully well that there are no permanent assets there as far as the terrorist training camps are concerned. But yet, if there has to be a symbolic response, India does carry out the equivalent of a military strike and makes it very clear to both Pakistan and the global community that this is the objective why India is carrying out this, and then be able to, I think, find the necessary exit as far as the military option is concerned. That, again, I submit, would not be cost-free, but it is a political decision that the Modi government would have to take, knowing exactly as to what kind of responses Pakistan would also embark upon.
Mr. Das, Mr. Bhaskar, I have another follow-up question to that. India is the fastest growing economy across the world right now. In that sense, as you yourself said, that we have a lot at stake, and one would imagine a lot more compared to Pakistan in case of a military standoff. Do you also think that Pakistan's aggression somewhere is stemming from the fact that India cannot afford to take any chances now?
Yeah, I think so. A fair amount of the impunity that we have seen, or what we associate with Pakistan, I think comes from the fact that there seems to be this appreciation in Pakistan that India's higher priority or the focus is on the economic and related, I would say, the prosperity index of India, which it does not wish to jeopardize just now. And also, I think the other factor which is allowing Pakistan to frankly get away with its current behavior, particularly the Pakistani army, is the kind of umbrella that is being provided to them both by China and, ironically, even by the United States of America. Because let's not forget, Taneia, you're sitting in Bombay. Bombay went through 2008 November. And the people who died in that terror attack were not just only Indians. There was a certain constituency of foreign nationals.
Yes.
And almost 8 years down the road, the global community has chosen to live with what I would call as this perfidy of Pakistan, and yet, as I said, mourn the individual deaths, whether it's a Daniel Pearl in the case of the United States, or other families across the world who lost near and dear in Mumbai. So I think for India, it is this reality of a Pakistan which is able to act with such impunity, not only because of their appreciation or understanding of India's objectives, but the political cover or umbrella that is extended to them by two of the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, the US and China, and now this nascent engagement with Russia, which I think is a very important development as far as the regional strategic orientation is concerned.
Right. I just very quickly, the bit about China's sudden closeness to Islamabad, that's a big threat, isn't it? We can't afford to ignore it, can we?
No, we can't afford to ignore it, but at the same time, I think we have to find the appropriate, I would say, tools in the Indian quiver about how do we engage with China. Because I don't think this can be seen as a black and white, that because China is now supporting Pakistan, therefore India would also have to take some very hard or firm decisions in relation to China. I mean, I constantly say that this is the current challenge, the contradictory pattern of global engagement. So forget the fact that we lived in a bipolar world. For a moment, everyone said, are we living in a unipolar world led by the US? Then we spoke about a multipolar world. I think we are in a contrapolar world, a contrarian world order where there are contradictory compulsions. Trade, economic, financial globalization trends actually compel countries which have security differences to engage with each other. US-China, China-Japan, China-India, and yet be able to contain, I would say, the security dissonance. So I think it is the contrapolar world that we are now currently dealing with, and it comes in a very messy way, including the terrorism index.
All right, Mr. Bhaskar, we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for taking time out for us. Uday Bhaskar there joining in live from Vijay Chowk to walk us really of how you should be making sense of all that's happened today.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.